Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Bishop Brian Willett coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this October 12th, 2018. And tonight we will be talking about cursed objects. This is something that every genuine exorcism ministry would have to contend with at some point. My own ministry has certainly had to deal with numerous cases involving cursed objects. You've even seen some of this on Ghost Adventures. It's a big problem. And tonight we're going to talk about how objects become cursed, and how exorcists neutralize such objects. In addition to that, my co-host Joy Keeling is going to give you a personal first-hand account of her own experience with a cursed object. Stay tuned. You do not want to miss this episode. Well, I bid you a great, giant thank you for joining us this evening for this topic. I know it's something that has come up quite a bit on Twitter, and we always like to draw our topics from the social media because these are the things that you all are interested in hearing more detail about. And Twitter only gives us so much room to have conversation. This gives us an opportunity to discuss in great detail the nature of these things that are not really talked about, and certainly people that are discussing them out there in the various mediums that exist for engaging in such conversation. Everybody's an expert. Very few people, though, have had real, genuine, firsthand experience, and certainly not prolific experience, not in the sense where they're dealing with this all of the time. And so exorcism ministry gives us insight into this. It's one way that we can share with you some of the, ideas and results that we've been able to ascertain, and hopefully help all of you to not have these problems yourself, and giving you also an outlet to be able to eliminate such a problem from your life if at some point you find that you have one. That's what this show is all about. That's what this show is sponsored by the church to do, so give you that means to open into dialogue and talk to somebody who will not think you're crazy for feeling that you have some kind of questionable, dubious object in your basement that might be wreaking havoc. Speaking of cursed objects, I should make an announcement here. I know a lot of you have also been so patient and asking me questions about the Ghost Adventures Live, where Travel Channel has mentioned that Zach is considering opening the Dybbuk box. This is something that's been debated about for some time. He's put out a poll on his Twitter recently asking his followers whether or not he should open it. I think they voted that they should. I think there was actually quite a large majority that voted that he should open it. So we don't know. I know that he seems undecided as to whether or not he really will, but you'll have to tune in to Ghost Adventures Live to find out. But what precautions are in place for this if he does decide to go ahead and open it? Well, I can tell you that I will be there for this event in the off chance that something goes very wrong. If someone develops an attachment or, has some kind of an effect from being in proximity to the events that take place at the Haunted Museum during that evening, I will be there to assist in any way that I can. It's going to be an interesting ride, I can tell you that. And I'm looking forward to being at their service in this capacity. Some have asked me if I agree with him opening the Dybbuk box. Well, I don't really have an opinion on it. I know that, Zach is going to do what Zach is going to do. And the best that I can do is to be there for him, to protect him and those that are present the best way that I can. So I'd rather be there than not be there. And that's how I feel about it. So we're going to do everything. I'll do everything I can to keep everybody safe. So I have had some experiences with these types of entities before. I'm not unfamiliar with them. And honestly, a Dybbuk is really nothing more than an extremely charged, wrathful spirit. A lot of people think it has some kind of specific Jewish connotation. It is just a wrathful spirit. It's not so much a cultural thing as it is just another range within the plethora of possibilities that are out there. The thing is that this is a very highly charged one, and I do believe that it has an attachment to something that is inside the box. I am aware of some of the history behind it. I know that at least the owner that sold it the first time, who acquired it at some kind of sale, I think it was an estate sale, found that there were 2 locks of hair of different colors inside it. And certainly if those locks of hair are still inside the Dybbuk box, I would be 100% certain that the attachment is to that hair. And so if the attachment is to an object inside the box and not the box itself, which is, I would say, more than 95% likely, then the good news is that even if they open it, it won't be able to leave for a long period of time. It won't be able to completely abandon the box altogether. It could actually exit the box. It could wreak havoc, but it would have to return to the box. There is only so much energy that it would be able to expend within, outside of the range of the object that holds the attachment. So that's the good news. The bad news is it's an extremely dangerous entity, and a lot can go wrong in that period of time. So I will be there to protect anybody who wants protection. I will not force protection on anyone, but if somebody comes to me for help, I will never turn them away. And we'll see what we can do. But that kind of is a good segue into tonight's topic, because a Dybbuk box in a certain way is kind of a cursed object, although, like I said, it's not the box itself, I think, that's cursed here. It's the objects inside of it. And so, we're going to be talking a lot about this tonight, but on the first segment, I really would like to give my co-host, Joy Keeling, an opportunity to discuss what her personal experiences are. Now, she currently is here in Atlanta. She just got off a plane to come to the Mission Church to deal with this very object. So she is calling in right now. She didn't want to miss this opportunity to be a part of this particular episode, and it was definitely her inspiration to hold this tonight. She's going to talk to you about why she's here, why she's on her way right now to come to the Mission Church tomorrow and begin the resolution process for an object that has wreaked havoc on her life for a very long time. So I'm going to now hand the microphone over to Joy, and she's going to tell you everything that she wants to tell you about her own personal experience with a cursed object. Go ahead, Joy.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm driving right now. Hands-free, don't worry.
Drive safely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've had a number of people ask me over the years, because for some reason people come to me and ask me things. Even complete strangers will walk up to me and be like, hey, do you know anything about demons? I remember one time I had to field that question while I was studying for astronomy, because I was an aerospace engineering major. I had nothing to do with any of this stuff. But yet here were people asking me questions like this. And like one person was upset because, somebody had given them a Ouija board and it had never been opened. It was fresh from Walmart. The seal was never broken. And they were like, is this cursed? Well, no, it's manufactured. It's a mass-produced object out of a factory. In order to be cursed, someone would have to do something with it in order to make it cursed. And, one person, also another person got upset because somebody had given them some sage from a metaphysical shop, again, thinking it was cursed. And it's like, no, something would have to be done to it to make it a cursed object. It's not just going to be cursed on its own. And, most people, when they're selling an item out of a metaphysical sort, they're going to have blessings on it because they want good things to happen to you and they want you to buy more of those things. But, it's because people don't really realize what it takes to make an object into a cursed object. Somebody has to either use it in, some kind of magical ritual, some kind of unnatural purpose, or it needs to be used in some kind of trauma. Something that's from a traumatic event can do that. And this object has had all of that. I'm going to switch gears. Everybody's thinking ghost adventures, but I'm going to go mysteries at the museum for a moment. This object is made of brass. It stands 10 inches tall and flares out to 4.5 inches at the base. On the inside, there is red staining and chalk marks. This item is a brass bell. And the story when I was a child, what my mother told me, what my father told me, was that at some point, this item was used to hold, it was used in magic rituals. They didn't really go into detail, but considering that they were doing stuff like summoning demons, that kind of gives the impression that maybe it was not good magic. It was probably something very dark. And the red staining on the inside, I was told it held sacrificial animal blood at one point, maybe even several points. I'm not sure how often it was used. This object, the bell, it had been used for that purpose, and that's the only reason it had ever been used. Other than that, it just sat on a shelf. So the only energy really associated with it was energy that was very malevolent. Now, I'm here, I keep forgetting. I came out here earlier this year to get rid of a different attachment, and that one's gone. But this entity that's attached to this bell is probably what made me weak toward this entity, or toward a number of entities. I've felt this thing influencing my life for so long. But when I came here in March, I went home, and this object had been in a china cabinet. And at some point, I took it out of that china cabinet and put it on my bed. And I couldn't understand why I did that. I came home from Atlanta and I looked around and I thought, why is this here? So I I was going to move it, and then I ended up just leaving it there for a long time, and then I ended up putting it in the back of a closet. And one day, it was the anniversary of my father's passing. I was thinking about him, and all of a sudden, these horrific memories began coming up to the surface. And it was so powerful that I ended up having what's called complex partial seizures. It looks like an android glitching. I would have these weird repetitive twitching movements, and I thought, my gosh, is this just going to be my life now? It was really scary. And some of these memories involved my dad telling me about a friend of his who was doing necromantic rituals. So he knew people who were involved in some really, really dark stuff. And one of the memories that came up was from when I was a small child, somewhere between the ages of 3 and 5. And I remember my dad asking me to let him know if it was too hot or too cold. He had been soaking the bell in hot water, and he used it to molest me. Now that's a pretty traumatic thing. That's something that would cause a curse just in and of itself. But then you have the fact that it was used to summon very negative things. And the fact that I've been carrying this thing around with me wherever I went, because when my dad lost custody, he wanted me to have that bell. I'm pretty sure that he was using it and doing what he did in order to attach something to me. The thought being, if he could control the entity, he could control me. And this thing, I have heard it in my head saying, I want to see if I've still got you. And I'd have these horrible thoughts, and I wouldn't fight them because I didn't know I needed to. I wasn't sure that that was actually another entity, because for some reason it wasn't registering. It was way too subtle. And when I realized that this was what was causing so much trouble, I knew I had to get rid of it. But it took forever, and I know, you were probably wondering, gosh, is she ever going to send this thing to me? Why does she keep holding on to it? And at one point, I had even put it in storage, because I thought, so long as I get it out of the house, then I should be feeling better. And I remember I put it in storage, and not long after that, I got sick again. I've been struggling with an illness that I believe was exacerbated by this entity. It's been exploiting this illness and making it so much worse than it really ever thought of being on its own. I ended up throwing up a lot. The first time that it happened was actually not long after I had returned from Atlanta, and I went to Mass, and as soon as the Mass started, I started getting sick. I went to the bathroom and I threw up, and when I looked in the mirror, my face was just this bright beet red. Even though I wasn't wearing a lot of makeup, I was only wearing like eyeliner and mascara, but the entire eye socket was covered in black. So I had this red face and black eyes, and when I looked in the mirror, my eyes looked really strange. So it freaked me out a lot. I couldn't keep going. I threw up in 2 different bathrooms in that church. I felt so horrible. And then I went home and eventually ended up in the emergency room for the first time. This was before I really realized that was what was affecting me. And when I did finally realize that was affecting me and I put it in storage, I had an infestation of flies. Now, I do let flies into my home every now and then, just because I have a salt gun and I like to hunt them down. Some people relax by playing Call of Duty. I play Fly of Duty. I might spell that second word a little differently. Um, so I know the life cycle of these flies. I know how long it takes them to gestate. I know how long it takes them to go from young, active flies to old, mature flies. These were all old, mature flies, and they were just sitting there, but they felt so menacing. And it was just kind of hanging over my head when I walked into the room and saw. And so I went and I grabbed my salt gun and I just, killed them all. And as I was doing it, I heard this voice in my head saying, "Go ahead, I'll make more." And the next morning I woke up and there were 50, and they weren't the young flies. They were old, mature flies that were just sitting there. But boy, would they dive bomb me if I started speaking scripture. And so I filled up my salt gun with exorcised salt that I got from you. And I started going around saying, "Hail Mary, full of grace," and shooting all the flies. And they never, but there had to have been at least 50. And that's a major infestation right there.
Haven't had
that's
them
a lot
since?
of manifesting.
You haven't had them since? Okay.
No, not at all. Every now and then a fly gets in, but it's usually a young, immature fly looking to mate, and then I shoot it, and all its hopes are dashed. So, oh, goodness. Oh, where am I going? Is it 75 or 85?
You want to go up 75.
75, okay.
If you're downtown, it gets a little tricky because
it does.
Yeah. Yeah, because it looks like it looks like you should be on the other side of the road when you really need to be on the counterintuitive side. Just keep following the signs.
Okay, cool.
Fortunately, there's not a lot of traffic in Atlanta at this time of night, but
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Not too bad.
Yeah.
Well,
So yeah, and one of the things I remember before I sent it to you, I think it was I was driving past, and I had just found out from the doctor that I was no longer diabetic. I'd lost enough weight because, of course, the entity before that had starved me, so I ended up losing a lot of weight that way. But then I lost even more weight because I was throwing up all the time.
Yeah.
And so, it is. Ooh, it's over there. I don't want to go over there.
Yeah, see, I'm telling you, it's counterintuitive.
Okay.
You're on the East Coast
confusing.
now. They mess with your head out here.
Oh, I know. I mean, in Nashville, you can get one street that turns into... Dude. Okay. Guy wouldn't let me over.
Oh, no, they don't do that. They don't do that
Yeah,
here.
Luckily, I'm a bit more aggressive when I'm driving. I used to be a professional driver, it was kind of like Grubhub, but it was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was before its time. And before that, I was a mail carrier. So if you have an address, I can find anything.
Awesome. Awesome.
But I'm also really good at, figuring out where I'm supposed to go with the car.
Right. Good. I'm glad
I just hate
once
driving
you get out of downtown, you'll be fine.
manual. Yeah, I hate driving automatic because automatic is just, I keep shifting.
Oh, yeah, I understand.
But anyway, so, but yeah, I remember driving past the storage unit, the place where the storage unit was. I was driving by, and I was, thinking to myself, wow, this is great news. I'm not diabetic anymore. And as I drove past, I said, the next time I come here, I'm taking you to the post office and I'm mailing you off to Georgia. And I got sick for 3 days.
Yeah.
And that was another indication that, yeah, maybe this is not just in my head. This is not me exaggerating things, because I keep thinking maybe I'm not, maybe that isn't really what happened. But holy crap, I felt so much better once I got rid of it. And I have not had another episode. I have not thrown up once since I said it.
That's awesome. And see,
I am feeling way better.
I kind of expected that once you got it out of close proximity to your person, each step that you took in that direction was going to slowly, over time, improve your physical, emotional, and psychological well-being, as well as, of course, the spiritual. But, I mean, really, the spiritual cannot cannot function if the other three components of your personhood are afflicted, and vice versa.
Exactly.
We're one unit. We're not just a whole thing. We're many little tiny things, and if one of those little tiny things is sick, the whole organism is sick. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there might be a number of reasons why your car doesn't start. It could be the carburetor. It could be the starter. It could be the battery's dead. Could be anything going wrong.
Yeah.
All of those things have to be functioning optimally.
Yeah.
And that's the same way with us. And that's one of the things that I've done. I prepared for this, with not just talking to you about it, but also talking to my therapist. I have a clinical psychologist that I see because, of course, if you're having repressed memories pop up like that and it's so bad that you're having seizures, then maybe you should see somebody about that.
Yeah.
But of course, the school that I go to, one of the things that they emphasize is self-care. And if you're going into ministry, the burnout rate is so high, you're going to want a therapist. It's just how you're going to have to live life.
It's true.
And so I finally did it. And I prepared with her for several weeks before embarking on this mission. And I prepared myself for all the things that could happen just from telling my story, because I know, there's always going to be backlash. There's going to be people who are supportive of me, but there's also going to be backlash. And that's something that just happens. It's part of life.
Yeah.
And it's worth it to me because if somebody else can hear a little bit of their life and my story, maybe it will trigger them to think, hey, maybe I should do something about this. Like I knew somebody who she had a belt buckle that belonged to her father, and he used to whip them all the time with that belt. And she was putting it in a place of honor, this belt buckle, because, it belonged to my dad. And I'm like, but the memories must be awful. And, she let out this laughter that just sounded maniacal and acted like it was something that happens with everybody. I'm like, no, none of my parents ever hit me. So this is weird. But that's considered a cursed object as well. It may not affect everyone, but it affected her because that was something that wounded her. And she was keeping it around like it was supposed to be there. Like she wanted to be that wounded person. And I don't understand why people would hold on to things like that, because that's not going to make you feel better. That's going to make you feel worse.
Well, see, that's part of the attachment, and that's more or less what we were talking about an episode or two ago, where we were discussing the two sides of attachment. We talk about philosophical attachments, then these are the things that kind of hold us back spiritually and put us at risk when we die, and are the seeds to what would are very much put us at risk for not being able to move on, or, I guess the popular terminology today is crossing over. I kind of cringe when I use that word, but there's really not a better one. It's not a better one. It is really the best, because you can't say going to heaven, because most people are not going to do that. I mean, it's a simple fact. I mean, really, for the majority, you've got what the church calls purgatory and hell. Going to heaven is from the get-go is rare. Not impossible, but it's not likely. So, you bring up a good point in respect to why would they hang on to it? Because the attachment works both ways. The spirit, and see, this is where it's really fundamental to understand the four types of demons, and to know that the created are perhaps the most perplexing and most menacing of all of them, because the other ones tend to operate along the lines of a certain type of behavioral pattern, which helps to identify them and also makes them, to a certain extent, predictable. Even fallen angels, even the most powerful fallen angels, follow a certain formula that once you know how to interpret that dynamic, it reveals itself. But the created are the hardest ones, because those are the ones that are tailored to you. And more often than not, they are created by our own traumas. Any emotional energy that is directed at something is going to create an entity. All right. Now, typically, when we have good experiences, it's not a big issue. We don't even think about it, in a sense. But this is really the seed of nostalgia. Why people become pack rats and hang on to all sorts of objects from various periods of their life, and they can't let go of them, and they should, but they don't. I'm actually kind of a lot like that in a lot of ways. I have a nostalgic side to me that has a difficult time letting go of things that have sentimental value. And that's because these are created entities that have created attachments with me, but they're benevolent, so they don't wreak havoc on me. But I have to keep them in check, because even something that is benevolent can eventually turn into an attachment that can hold you back. And that in itself is still a spirit attachment. It's just not the kind that an exorcist would typically look out for. First, I want to say, Joy, I congratulate your remarkable courage for giving the audience this very personal story, and being very candid and forthcoming about everything that you have experienced with this. Because honestly, I want more people to be like you. I want more people to be that forthcoming. I can't help anyone if they don't tell me what's going on. And the hardest thing is that, and Sister Mary Joan can tell you this, the hardest thing about this work is that people hold way too much back. They give you about 5 or 10% of the story, and only through the course of an investigation. It's almost like a police investigation in a lot of ways. Yeah. And just like the police, any kind of authority figure, nobody wants to talk too much to. So an exorcist, a bishop, that's kind of too much authority for some people, and they just hold back. They don't tell you everything, and that it comes up. Sister Mary Joan and I did a case very recently in Los Angeles, and that was a situation where we had only so much information to work with the family, and it was only through the course of our evening and doing more investigative work did some of the true issues come out that allowed us to more accurately assess the problem. So you're the epitome of what everyone who is seeking help should be. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to hide. And if you want help, there's no help to be had if you don't completely come forward and be honest. So I really want to applaud your being just so forthcoming with everyone publicly and discussing something that's a very private and personal and traumatic issue for you. But hopefully you'll draw strength from this, and I think you are. Yeah, I think.
I mean, I worked with my therapist for, like I said, several weeks trying to get myself to the point where just talking about it wouldn't freak me out too bad. Yeah. She gave me breathing exercises for if I got stressed out over it, because of course, just remembering it is painful and hard. And then sharing it and knowing that, hundreds of people, thousands of people could listen to it. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, what have I done? But it's that whole thing of, when we're going through stuff like this, it's really hard to come clean and say, yeah, I had a hand in this. We want to say, oh no, we're just totally victims. But, it wouldn't be affecting you so much if you hadn't let it.
And there is that, but I also understand that once an attachment is formed, manipulation is par for the course, and it gets into your head, because that's where. And you start thinking those,
and you start thinking those are your thoughts, and they're not.
Right, and we've talked about this, off the air, mm-hmm. you and I, and it does. It gets into your head. That's where the attachment actually is. It happens at the psyche, at the level of the psyche. Which is why, there aren't any people with demonic oppressions or possessions that do not experience psychological side effects, and that makes the diagnostic aspect very difficult. And it allows people that are more in an atheist worldview to reason and say, well, see, there's the proof that it's not a supernatural thing. It's just a person with emotional or mental illness. But, the fact of the matter is there is another dynamic there. And, psychotherapy these days is pretty good.
Yeah.
Some are better than others. Some psychotherapists are better than others, and some methodologies are better than others. That's always going to be the case. But, generally speaking, there is good evidence. There's good research that shows that when a person commits to psychotherapy, it changes their brain chemistry more radically than even psychotropic medication does. So you could argue, there's an argument that can be made that psychotherapy is more powerful than pharmaceuticals, even though pharmaceuticals tend to be the first thing that everyone jumps to because it's the easy solution.
They've come a long way. I mean, when I was a kid in therapy, because of what had happened, I never knew what to talk about. I never knew how to interact with the person. There's no guidebook. But now, I have someone who explains how we're going about things. And like she told me about the breathing exercises and touching things with different textures and, looking around and seeing, okay, let's see 5 things that are blue, and trying to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, because that's the nervous system that calms you down. And by engaging that, you're cutting back on that fight or flight response, because the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system can't operate at the same time. So when she told me, that we're trying to get it so that you can keep yourself calm when talking about these things, so you don't have a panic attack, so you don't have a seizure or something, this is so that you can engage that nervous system response that will help keep you, even, while, and feeling safe while you're describing this. And that's, before they would have just given you a pill and said, hope for the best. But this is, being able to take care of it on my own when I'm out in the world, that makes all the difference.
Well, that's the secret. That's the real secret to this, and it's the secret to the entire exorcism ministry, because the perception is that the exorcist has some kind of power, some kind of almost magical empowerment that can be used to combat some type of spiritual energy that the victim feels powerless against. Now, there is a certain element to that is true, but that is not a proper way to look at it. What it should be looked at is the exorcist is a facilitator for the grace of Christ, and the relationship between victim and Jesus Christ is how the person arrives at being healed from an oppression or even a possession. Of course, the rites of exorcism are used as an extreme measure to inject grace. It's like it's basically, again, it's a person's like having a heart attack, and this is the CPR. This is the this is the method for starting the heart up again. But now begins after the life is saved initially, then begins the change of lifestyle so that the person doesn't have a heart attack again. And that can only come from a person's relationship to themselves, and in this particular case, a relationship to themselves and God. So, when I'm doing assessment and I'm looking at a client and I'm trying to decide whether or not a person, what kind of problems they have, I'm not just looking at is this a cursed object? Is this a demonic oppression? Is this person possessed? I'm not just looking at that. I am looking at that, but I'm not just looking at that. I'm also looking at whether or not the person has a viable prognosis. And what I'm looking for is how committed are they to their own healing? Do they want me to do all the work? Are they going to develop a relationship with me and the church? Because short of that relationship, there's actually very little I can do. I can only, again, inject some meaningful grace into an immediate situation to give them the chance to maybe come out of it enough to make good decisions later. But if they're not willing to work with me for the long term, there's not much of a prognosis for them. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't do what you're doing here, Joy. I mean, you and I have been working on resolving your issues for several months now. And, you know, again, the reason you are experiencing so many positive results, and honestly, quite quickly, quite rapidly, is because you have entered into a relationship with this ministry. And I can't think of any other way, I can't think of any other example that would be more powerful than when a person's dealing with something like a cursed object or something that has this lingering force wreaking havoc on their lives, getting into their head, convincing them that they're powerless. You talk to a person that's under a demonic oppression, they always feel powerless. They always feel like it's the battle's lost. I give up. I don't have the strength. You always hear these same phrases over and over and over again. This is the demon. This is the demon talking to them. You know, even though we expect to hear those words, we still have to have a shred of commitment in order to be able to bring that person to healing. That's what's needed. That's what's necessary. Even Jesus Christ in the scriptures, when he'd heal somebody, he would always tell them that it's your faith that healed you.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's
your
kind of...
Your faith has made you well.
Yes, yes. And that's because they entered into relationship with him. So that it was like a battery. You know, you need to have the positive and negative sides of that battery to create the polar conditions for an energy charge to empower whatever it is that you're doing. And so in this particular case, the power of grace requires that exchange between Christ and, in this situation, a victim. And if the person's not willing to enter into that relationship, there's really not a whole lot that can be done. There's a few situations where there's things that can be done. You know, and like I said, we have had clients that are non-Christian, and we have to operate a very different way. We still help them, but again, we're more limited with the things that we can do because there isn't a relationship with Christ. So we have to kind of work things a different way. But when we're talking at the level that what you're coming here to resolve, you know, there is nothing other than the grace of the church that can save you from this. Nothing. If you did not commit to the church, it would consume you. And thank God that hasn't happened. And thank God that you are getting more powerful every day. And after we perform this ritual, I think you're going to feel more power than you've ever felt in your entire life. I really think you're going to. Yeah, I really do. I mean, it might not happen immediately. It's always a process, but I think you're going to experience that. So for the purposes of the audience and their questions about cursed objects, let's talk a little bit about what a resolution like this looks like. Well, we already know, we've answered the first question. How do these objects become cursed? Well, number one, they're used in dark ritual. So that's the traditional way, of course. You know, you would perform some type of occult ritual, whether you use ceremonial magic or low magic, or something that would invoke a spirit that is malevolent in order to either attach to an object or to attach to a person. Because even people can become cursed objects. In a sense, a demonic oppression is a cursed human being. I mean, essentially, they're the same thing. And so anything can become cursed, anything at all. And even a Bible. Even a crucifix. Somebody asked me on Twitter a little while back. I'm not sure if I answered or not, but she said that she runs an antique shop. Did you see that one? Yeah,
she deals in pre-Columbian antiques and ran into a Bible with a rosary, and she can't go near it.
Yes, and she was wondering, well, these are supposed to be holy objects. Why, you know, is there something? And honestly, I mean, I don't know anything about these objects, so there's not much I can really say other than speculate. But I would speculate to say that there's a very good chance that these objects came in contact with some dark energy and developed an attachment, particularly if they were not blessed. And a lot of Protestant objects, Protestant Bibles, you know, Protestant denominations that don't bless their objects because they see it as superstitious, or it's not part of their particular Christian tradition. These are just books at this point. So a Bible that's not blessed is just a book. If you can have a book on witchcraft and believe it's cursed, have a grimoire that you think is cursed, well, a Bible can be just as cursed if it's not blessed particularly. But even a blessing can be counter or circumvented by coming into contact with some type of dark force.
And isn't there like, if something is sacred and then it's abandoned, isn't that something that can also affect it as well? Because I know that's something with, like, abandoned churches tend to end up with something inside them that's not holy.
Correct. If they're not properly deconsecrated, or even if they are properly deconsecrated, there is a process of deconsecrating a church that is being taken out of use. But even that is not really going to protect it in the future from something coming in contact with it. And even though, thousands of masses may have been held there, and a lot of sacred activity took place there, it still doesn't mean that over time, if those blessings are not reinforced, that it wouldn't wane, because it does. Where you live in entropy, the cosmos operates by the rules of entropy. That's one of those laws of thermodynamics that even permeates the spiritual realm. So even nothing is permanent. Nothing, not even a blessing, is permanent. That's why we don't go and receive First Communion and then we're done. That's why we go to receive the Eucharist weekly, or preferably daily, so that we're always reinforcing the grace. It's not that the grace is necessarily wearing off that quickly, but it does need to be reinforced through our commitment, through relationship, and that type of thing. So,
oh gosh, that makes so much sense, because I'm thinking about like, if, say, there's a blessed object, if it's abandoned and we're not there to, reinforce that imbuement with blessing, it can degrade over time and become something warped, a warped version of itself. So that makes sense.
Yeah, particularly if there's even a sacrilege that took place.
Yeah.
Where it's been violated spiritually.
Right. Yeah.
What you're describing with your particular case and this cursed object that you're coming here to participate in it's going to be an exorcism, minor rite of exorcism. For those of you who saw Exorcism in Erie on Ghost Adventures, this is almost identical type of situation, as far as the attachment goes, as far as the cursed object goes, as far as how we would resolve it. So in this particular case, an exorcism is going to have to be performed on it, and so a sacrilege, any kind of violation of the spiritual nature of an environment or an object or a person, is going to have a residual effect. And so if it's a blessed object, it's going to neutralize that blessing. And if it's not a blessed object, it can actually develop an attachment. So, yes, so that's why, you can have churches and that develop dark energy, just on the basis that they're not, the blessings are not being reinforced, but the darkness is. And so the result is attachment. Andrea asks an interesting question, and I will say, Andrea, this is, I'm sorry, Andra. This is something that only Joy can answer. So I will yield to Joy on this question, but I know that you're not in the chat room, Joy, so I'll read it for you. She asks if we will film the exorcism for documentation purposes. Now, typically, we always document every exorcism, but is this something that you would want to share with people, or is it something you'd want to keep private?
Absolutely. I want to record and document every bit of it. I have pictures on my phone of the bell, and from different angles, and rulers next to them so you can see how big it is. I've been documenting as much as I could the thoughts that went through my head, because that was another thing. When I came back from Atlanta, when I got back home, before, I would start praying spiritual warfare prayers. I got it from one of the local Catholic stores. There's a little booklet thing with prayers in it, and I would pray, and whenever I would get to certain parts of it, I could usually count on something like, at one point there were some geese flying by and they began screaming while they flew past me, because I felt like something entered into them and they left. They fled because I was praying those prayers. Another time, it was a car that suddenly revved its engine really loud and drove away. And that was not necessary. They didn't even have a stop sign. They were just driving down the road, and it's 25 miles an hour, so they were speeding.
Right. Yeah.
But, every time that I prayed for a week, it seemed like something would happen when I got to a particular part, when I was praying that, the demonic forces would leave. And then that would happen every single time. And I thought, there's something else going on here, and I don't know what's going on. And that was before we figured out that there was another entity involved.
Well, with your permission, I have no problem with this. And if at any point you decide to not do this, I will yield to you completely, because this is your resolution. But I think for the purposes of encouraging others to step forward, to be more forthcoming when they come to us for help, and to see how effective, this type of commitment and relationship can be towards one's own healing, I would love to be able to live stream the exorcism for the audience, and we can put it on Twitter, so that those who would like to watch and see this object be annihilated will be able to experience something that very few people have ever seen. Are you up for that? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, well, everyone...
In fact, before I came out, I wanted to ask if I should bring any equipment, but I thought, you have a lot of the same equipment I do, so what would I bring?
Yeah, we've got pretty much everything.
And so do I.
Yeah, we'll use the SLS for this. We find the SLS to be perhaps the single most useful item for this type of resolution process. It really shows us things as the demon becomes weaker, they have a harder time hiding, honestly, and and the SLS picks it up. So yeah, if since you're agreeable to this, for those of you who are listening, Joy's resolution is going to take place on Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So I can't say that we're going to go live immediately at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, but it will be approximately that time. So if you're interested in watching this, of course it will be recorded and it will be logged into the Twitter Periscope system. So if you miss it, you'll be able to go back and watch it. But if you want to see it in real time, it will be around that time. So just watch my Twitter closely. Make sure that you're following me. Make sure you have notifications set on so you don't miss it. And we will go live from my Twitter on Sunday afternoon when we're ready to begin this process, and you can see it, and we'll have the SLS set up, and if the demon actually reveals itself, you might be able to even catch some of the things that we catch with our own equipment, to verify some of the things that we need to verify in order to assess how effective the exorcism is going, which allows us to know whether or not we need to kick it up a notch or we can tone it back down. And so it'll be very interesting, and it will definitely be a good segue from this episode, allowing you to see one of the ways that this is done. So so the first step, obviously, to elimination of a cursed object is exorcism. No question about it. First of all, we want to always bless the people who are being afflicted. So that will always happen. We always bless anybody that's in the room at the time of the resolution. And these days, we only really allow clergy into these exorcisms because for safety reasons. So everyone's blessed, and then we begin the operation of removing the spirit by force from the object and annihilating it. The annihilation is a process that Sister Maria, Joan, and I do exclusively. Everyone else will, stand back, and they will usually have them pray the rosary or some equivalent prayer that helps to reinforce the operation. Then we do seal the room. I use incense. Of course, the room's already sealed, but we also seal the room with incense. And it's a special kind of incense that has been blessed a certain kind of way that will basically, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's sort of like the way a white blood cell attacks a piece of bacteria. And the incense becomes sort of like the white blood cell, and it surrounds the demonic force, and then it just slowly just wears away at it. It consumes it. And then you can feel when it's gone, because typically the temperature in the room drops radically. It goes from, when you're dealing with a demon, it's almost always too warm. Ghosts tend to be cold spots. Demons tend to be warm spots. And that's not always true. And there's variations to that, which makes this job so much more complicated than it otherwise would be. But that's the general rule. So usually we'll feel a cool air, a cool breeze. There'll be like a release, sometimes a popping feeling in one's head, like when you're descending in an airplane too rapidly, and you feel the pressure changes. There's that sensation. Sometimes the lights will start to flicker. There can be all sorts of things, and then sometimes if it's a very weak entity, there's really not a whole lot of drama. It just goes away. But that's how we do it. So we'll do the exorcism. Once the object is exorcised and we have noticed signs of release, typically we see improvement also with the afflicted, particularly if they're in a bad state, sort of like what we saw with Chris in Exorcism in Erie, where he was, being directly affected. And I only had that one evening to work with him, so we had to do everything very quickly and try to do as much as we. Fortunately, it worked on that one shot. But we will then, after we have the signs of release, we will wrap the object in saturated in holy water and exorcised oil, and then at the next holy fire, we throw it in. Now, metal objects obviously are not going to melt in a typical wood fire. It's not hot enough. So once it has been scalded, I guess, for lack of a better word, scalded by the holy fire, and it has stayed in there through the length of the holy fire, which is usually several hours. Once it is cooled down, we will extract what remains of it, and then it is sent off to be melted down. And then that's to just further remove its form, so that there's not even an archetypal impression of it. And then after it has been it's been melted down, it's usually just melted down into some type of undefined shape, and then that is just buried and in a insignificant location, and there's nothing really attached to it anymore by this point. The exorcism removes the attachment. The holy fire is just to further reinforce archetypally that this thing is truly gone. That's more for psychological and emotional purposes than anything else, honestly. But we are now at the top of the hour, and we will be just taking a break here. This is Vestiges After Dark. I'm with my co-host Joy Keeling. We're talking about cursed objects. Don't go away.
When I'm with you, I am able to keep pushing my limits, and all the drive that I have, well, I'm going the distance with you. I didn't know what I had till I knew what was missing, and everything that I dread, well, I built a resistance with you. I could look at you for days. Time was well spent, that's when I knew that I need to spend my life here with you. Fast lane, I understand that you've been broken too many times, but I'll be waiting to mend your wounds from all you've taken. But if we listen to each other, admit our mistakes, then I can show you who I am, because I'm not the same. I'm better with you. I'm better with you.
The seasons come and go like thoughts of you. Like a wave returns to the sea into the blue. They change but in a cycle that I can't lose. Each painful but delightful to live through. You came into my life just like another season. Not for long, just a time, just like another season. Maybe this time next year you'll reappear for no reason. But I'll cherish every day until you come my way this season. Season. Just like another season. Not for long, just a time. Just like another season. Maybe this time next year you'll reappear for no reason. But I'll cherish every day until you come my way this season. on changing all over again. Yeah, we will keep on changing, just like another season.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second half of this edition of Vestiges After Dark. This is Bishop Brian Willett with my co-host Joy Keeling, and we're talking about cursed objects in this second half here. We'll be taking your questions from the chat room, answering more questions that came in from Twitter, and just opening dialogue about this subject. Don't go away. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us through the break. Gives me a chance to sort of rest my voice for the second half here. And where we left off, we were answering some questions that were coming up about variations of this cursed object theme. And one that I did notice on Twitter that I found something that comes up a lot and worth mentioning here tonight was the use of sage in removal of a suspected demonic demonic infestation, or even if there might be an attachment somewhere in the house, people will always say, I saged the place, but it didn't go away. Yeah, it won't. Sage, unfortunately, doesn't really work for this type of thing. Sage is a cleanser. It's a sort of like spiritual soap. Okay, it's a neutralizer. The problem with it is twofold. One, it only really works on a very low level. Okay, so essentially all it's doing is just clearing out the ash, residual energy that might be in a place. So when you buy a new home, you might want to sage it just to get rid of the previous owner's crap that does get stuck in the abode. It does happen. But it's not usually something that's demonic. It's just, negativity from other people or even energy that you just don't want. But it also neutralizes good stuff too. So if a person, has a priest come to their house and then the priest performs a blessing of the home and the family then starts saging the hell out of the place, well, guess what? It takes the blessing away too. So it's removing the help as well as what you think you're working to get rid of the negative. So I tell people never use sage when you suspect that you're up against something that might be on the level of the demonic, because it's usually going to make matters worse. And somebody from Twitter actually mentioned this before we went live tonight, how he had a situation and used sage and it actually made matters worse. Well, yeah, it usually does. Another question comes up is about Palo Santo wood. You've seen Billy Tolley use it on Ghost Adventures, and I think he's made it really popular because I'm hearing more and more about it, and I didn't really hear too much about it prior to it really making an appearance on the show. I knew about it, but I never saw so many people talking about it until recently. And Palo Santo wood is a little bit different. Okay, it's actually a lot stronger than sage. It's a lot better of a medium than sage in terms of cleansing away energy that you don't want. But the limitation to Palo Santo wood is you have to really use it right away. You have to be sensitive enough to know that something's latching onto you, and then you could deploy the Palo Santo wood and use that smoke to sort of clear it off. It sort of makes you slippery, and the negative or dark spirit can't connect. But if you're not catching it right at the time that it tries to latch onto you, it really isn't going to pull one off of you once it's made the connection. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind about this stuff. Doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. It just means use them responsibly and don't use them incorrectly. You wouldn't take Tylenol to cure a malignant cancerous tumor. Okay, you would need to go get different treatment for that. But over-the-counter painkillers is not really going to be a solution. So, you have to make sure that you're using the right formula for the problem that you have. So that hopefully answers all of your questions on sage and Palo Santo wood, when to use them and why when not to use them. Another question that came up that I wanted to cover really quickly here is consignment sales and antiques. People have asked me a lot about, in fact, we were talking just recently before the break about a person that runs an antique shop, and
Sorry,
she had.
I was waving at the church. Sorry.
Oh, waving at the church. Okay, all right, good, very good. You mean you passed the mission church?
Yeah.
Oh wow, you made good time. So you're already in the area. Fantastic. Yeah, it's there waiting for you. Nobody's there right now, but it will be. Well, maybe there are some people there. Who knows? You just don't know who's in a church. We have a lot of pastor-throughs spiritually, of course.
Yes.
But consignment and antiques, even Bibles and rosaries could be problematic if they were in an environment where negative events took place. Even standard conventional abuse. Okay, so we don't even have to be talking about something that's at the level of what Joy described tonight, where her, parents were involved in dark ritual magic. and then, brought this into an abusive situation. There are, abuse in and of itself, whether it be sexual or even emotional abuse, which is something that goes very much unresolved, because there really isn't a way to regulate it. It's kind of intangible, so it's hard to say, oh, this person's a victim of emotional abuse, we need to go after the parents, or it's just something that tends to go unresolved and can lead to problems, and also be the source of a created demonic attachment down the road. Psychological abuse, physical abuse, all of it, conventional abuse, it can produce these effects. And even if a person, like let's say you have a child who wears a piece of jewelry, and the child is constantly being emotionally abused by the mom or the dad or both. And this goes on for 18 years. Child finally grows up, gets the hell out of there, and but keeps the jewelry because there's some kind of sentimental attachment to it. That can become, in the same exact way, an attached object that has a demonic malignancy to it that can affect the person's life adversely. And so we have to deal with it the same way. Exorcism is still required, same way. It's not a fallen angel. It's not even an elemental. It's not some unrested spirit. It's just simply a trauma that has taken on a life of its own. We are that powerful. Human beings are creatures of creation, and we can use those faculties without even being aware of it, and that can lead to all sorts of disastrous effects when we are victims of trauma and we don't know how to deal with it, and we're not really trained in the spiritual sophistication that is necessary to control it. So what about consignment and antiques? Well, I think you know where I'm going with this one.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yeah, it's problematic. And I don't know anybody that has ever operated an antique shop that hasn't reported to me that the place is haunted. It's haunted like crazy. All of them are. And that's because you get enough of these objects coming into a place and being stored there. Well, guess what? You got like a little tiny, you got a storefront that's maybe, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 square feet. So you got 1,000, 2,000 square feet Dybbuk box. And you got an attached it just takes one attached object. Could be the most insignificant thing. And it could stay in the person's inventory for years. So what do you do? Well, personally, I think all antique shops should be constantly blessed. I think they need to undergo regular blessing. Which could be very hard to obtain, particularly if you're not Catholic. The other thing, same thing with consignment. You get kids' clothing cheap. People like to share kids' clothing because, clothing is expensive and children quickly outgrow various sizes. So you're constantly having to buy new clothes. And a lot of families resort to buying used clothes as a means of saving money. Sounds like a great idea. Problem is, you don't know who had that. Now, chances are the person who had it before, there wasn't anything dark enough going on for there to be an attachment, but you never know. So in those cases, it's best to get the clothing blessed. And if you can't get a priest, at least get some holy water and wash out the clothes in holy water. That will usually remove anything that's negative. I mean, of course, if it has something that's at the level of what we're dealing with on Sunday, holy water is not going to be enough. You're going to need to ask a priest for help. But those are, hopefully that answers the questions that came in on Twitter about that. So those are things to be mindful of in your own personal life when you're going out there looking at buying something used. And I mean, I buy used things. I'm kind of a eBay junkie. Every now and then I'll find something that I like. But I always give it a quick blessing. Daniel asked, what about blessing Zach's haunted museum, or is that useless? I would not feel comfortable doing that without his permission. And I really, knowing Zach the way I do, I don't think Zach would want me to calm the activity in that museum. I really don't think he wants that. So I don't think he'll ever let me bless it. But I would never do it without his permission. Should it be blessed? I don't know if it needs to be blessed because obviously he is using it as almost a containment building. But I think it should at least be ritually sealed so that nothing in there can come back out with somebody. And it would make it a lot safer for people to go visit it. But again, that would be up to him to ask me to do. I would never do that without his permission. It's just, it's his property, and, he has a right to do with it what he wants. I can make suggestions, but, it's up to him. Let me see if there's any other questions here. If I've missed any questions, if there's questions that you've asked, remember Joy's not in chat tonight, so I'm not catching all of them. So please go ahead and re-ask them, and I'll be paying attention the best that I can. Hopefully, get to some of your questions there. But Joy, have you ever? I mean, I don't know. A little known fact about you is that you do possess a natural ability to perform what is known as psychometry. Yeah. And you can touch objects and gain energetic impressions of them.
Right.
Have you ever come in contact with an old antique or something that gave you a very dark feeling and you just needed to get away from it? Something that wasn't yours, something that you just were out in public. Maybe you were at walking through an antique shop, or maybe you were on vacation somewhere and went through a little store and saw something. Did that ever happen to you?
Not really, because I guess a lot of them are mild. I know before I met with you for my appointment in March, I hung out at the antique store that's next to the church. So I wasted some time there, just hanging out, and nothing really gave me any bad vibes. But, a lot of the stuff it's typically inert. Usually when I run into something that if it feels negative, like something has gone on with it, it belongs to somebody, and they actively have it in their home, and they're like, oh, it's no big deal. And it's like, no, it is a big deal. And I kind of understand, because when I was trying to get the bell out of my house, I kept having thoughts like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's not really that bad. It's not that bad, but yet when I'm talking to the bishop on the phone, I start bleeding for no reason. What? My arm started bleeding. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another time when I was trying to wrap it up in, I put holy water on it, oil, black silk, I had the salt that you gave me in there. I put all kinds of stuff on it, black salt, everything. And it just got so hot that I barely could stand even just being. It was just so hot. I felt like I was going to get sick. And I was sitting right next to the balcony door, and, the door was open, and I just stood out on the balcony, and it was fine out there. But standing right next to the door, I could not bear being there because it was so hot. And I kept having thoughts like, well, I could just investigate it. It's not like I don't have a lot of equipment.
Yeah. And
the part of my brain that, has had a little bit of training from dealing with you told me, no, don't investigate it. Somebody else can investigate it if they want, but holy crap, just get it out of your house.
Yeah.
And I had to plow through that, because it was telling me, oh, you don't want to do that. Oh, it's not that big a deal. Oh, investigate it first. And these are all thoughts that were not mine. They were coming from the bell.
Yeah. Yeah, I could tell. I definitely could tell from, some of the interactions we had in the course of setting up for this exorcism, which takes months. It's not something we just jump right into. There's planning and preparation that's required. We have to get everybody ready for it, everyone that's going to be involved in it. So Yeah, I could tell. And again, it's to be expected. I think I want to say I even warned you about that would happen.
Yeah. Yeah, you did.
So, you were prepared, did the right thing. You got it out of there. And even, I wasn't really happy with it going to storage, but I mean, it was still better than being in your closet.
Yeah.
But I was glad when you finally did send it, and it was sent to us and was put into, we have a containment cabinet at the church that is ritually sealed, and all of our cursed objects or suspected cursed objects go into that, so that it can be dealt with when we have a time to actually work with those objects. There's actually 2 dolls in there right now, and the bell. There might be even something else in there. I'm not quite sure. We don't open it until we're ready to work with something from it. Looking over here, somebody asked, it was Judith asked, she still has questions about what she sent me, tried to contact me, but wasn't able to reach me, how to stay in touch. Between all of the pastoral duties, all of the client work that I have to do with people here in the ministry in Atlanta, and my pastoral clients, I do pastoral counseling. It's difficult for me to, be able to take on much more, since I am really the only priest. I'm the only exorcist in the church. Everyone else is a nun. So all of the pastoral responsibility falls on my shoulders. I just simply don't have time to work that side of the ministry. So, fortunately, though, we have a staff of nuns who are willing to take your questions. So if you do have questions, if there is an object that you've sent to us at some point and you have further follow-up questions that you have about it, the best way to get those questions answered would be to send an email to office@nicolean.org. That's the primary email. You can find it at the website, esotericcatholic.org or nicolean.org. Either one gets you to the same place. Just click on the Contact Us section, and then there is the email is right there, office@nicolean.org, and you can send your questions there, and it might take a little bit of time, no more than usually a few days, but your questions will be answered. I can promise you that. Let's see. Andra says, Bishop, do these objects, let's say you see something in an antique store, do they have the power to call out to you as if to say, find me, you want to take me home? Oh, absolutely they do.
Oh, yeah, totally. Oh, my gosh. And it's not just stuff like that. I mean, I go into a metaphysical shop and I'm like, okay, there's a rock calling me.
Yeah.
And I know,
Yeah.
and I find it every time. I know what's calling me. I can find it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that can definitely happen. And, again, sometimes it's benevolent. Sometimes it's really not something that you need to worry about. But, unless you're very sensitive and experienced and working with both sides of the spiritual. See, the thing is, the real problem is, at least with Christians, is that they are so afraid of the demonic that they only focus on the good side of our spiritual nature. So they're really into angels, they're into saints sometimes if they're Catholic. They're obviously into God. But anything demonic scares the living hell out of them, and the problem with that is that leads to ignorance. That leads to inexperience. You need to have interactions with the demonic, otherwise you're not going to know how to deal with it. So you really should never run from it or be afraid of it. You should stand up to it, because what you need to keep in mind at all times, this applies to every baptized Christian. Okay, you have the grace of baptism. You are baptized into the priesthood of all believers. There is nothing more powerful than that. That makes you a virtual exorcist by virtue of the grace of the Holy Spirit. No demon has any power that you don't give it. None. Not one. They are nothing more than psychic vampires sucking your blood. Don't let them. Okay? And as long as you go through your spiritual life knowing that the devil has no more power than what you give him, then you have nothing to be afraid of. As long as you have control. You have to have control. Okay? How do you get control? You give it to Christ. And see, that's something that I can tell Christians. They should understand this, and it should make sense to them. like Daniel says in the chat room, they feed off of your fears. Absolutely. Don't be afraid of them. That's power you're giving them. Absolutely. Be mindful of the demonic. Be cognizant of the demonic. Don't run from it. Stand up to it. You don't need an exorcist to do that. Let's see. What else do we have here? Charmaine asks, what about receiving a blessing after being at the museum? This would probably help attachments from the museum follow you home. Yeah, I would always recommend, if you can, get yourself blessed prior to going and get yourself blessed again upon leaving. If you're going to go to Las Vegas, I know Las Vegas has some Catholic churches. It even has some Eastern Catholic churches. There's a few choices there. If you are Catholic, I would go. And honestly, even if you're not Catholic, you can go to a Catholic church. And this is what you do, okay? It would be inappropriate for me to tell you to go up and receive communion. The Nicolaitan Catholic Church has open communion. So as long as you're baptized, you are welcome to receive our Eucharist. We do teach you that you should understand what it is you're receiving. You shouldn't be in mortal sin. These are the same Catholic rules that apply to a Roman Catholic. But we absolutely, are advocates of an open communion. As long as you're baptized, we see you as a Christian. That means you should be able to receive the body of Christ. Now, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't see it this way. They have a closed communion, and it is something that we should respect. Okay, so if you were to go down there, you're not a Catholic. Okay, you're not a Roman Catholic, but you go down to Las Vegas because you want to see the museum. Who doesn't? It's cool. It's pretty fascinating. And I think it was Julie that was saying that, it's actually a really good place for all these things, because it's better that they're there in the care of professionals like the GAC than they would be in the homes of the lay person, wrecking havoc on people. So I'm actually kind of happy that Zach's collecting all these things. The only thing I wish he would do is seal the building. But, in lieu of that, what he's doing is much better than it being in people's homes. And he knows how to deal with it, and he has contact with people like me. So if problems arise, there's things that can be done. But if you're going to go down there, what you can do, even as a non-Catholic, is look up the Catholic church in the area. There's even one on the Strip, I think. Or at least there used to be.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
It's still there.
It's still there. Okay, good. You can go down there, and when it's time to go up for communion, you go up with your hands crossed across your chest. That tells the priest that you're not receiving, but you would like a blessing. Okay? And then he'll bless you. And not only do you get a personal blessing when you go up in that capacity, you also get the blessing at the end of Mass. And then you get two blessings that you can go the next day or even later that day. You can go to Mass in the morning, and then later that day, just look up the liturgical schedule, make sure that you've got it worked out. And then, go to the museum, have fun. And then when you come out the next day, you can go back to Mass, get the blessing again. So Charmaine makes a good point there. I think that is something that it should be. You should all look into, and you don't even have to be Catholic to do that. Just make sure you respect the process. Don't receive the Eucharist if you're not a Roman Catholic, because it's their rules, not mine. But it is what it is. All right, let's see here. Judith asks if vermin show up if there is an entity in the home. If so, why? Well, kind of like what Joy was talking about with
sometimes,
the flies.
yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Flies are the biggest thing. I want to say my very first case in Atlanta, well, it wasn't even in Atlanta, it was actually in Alabama, but the first case that I took for the Atlanta division of the Order of Exorcists was such a case where I even got an EVP over a voicemail that the victim left the church at 2:00 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
She would call in frantic terror from the events that were going on in her house. And while she was calling and crying to the voicemail, because nobody, we have no resources to hire a full-time office staff. So almost all calls to the church go immediately to voicemail, and then they get filtered out to the various clergy to answer when it's possible for them to do so. So nobody was obviously there at 2:00 in the morning, but she left a message on the church voice line, and she was talking about, what she was experiencing, and over her voice, you can hear it crystal clear. This loud demonic voice say, "It's over." And I mean, it just washes out her voice. Kind of like trying to tell me, don't even bother. I've already won this. And then the next day, my house was filled with hundreds of flies.
Oh, my gosh.
And I mean, the house that we had at the time, it's not the one that I live in now, but the one house that I had at the time, the main part of the house was actually on the second. It was a 3-story house, and the main part of the house was actually on the second floor. So you couldn't even argue that, well, maybe the trash down in the driveway had something in it, and they were all coming in through a window. I mean, there were no windows open. There were no doors open. We hadn't barbecued in weeks. So there was no reason that there would be any flies like this. And that's the standard housefly. It was just like Amityville Horror. Mm-hmm. Same type of thing. So, this is something that happens. It's something that we're very familiar with. Many, many priests and exorcists will tell you the same thing. They've all experienced this, and Joy, she experienced it as well. Why does it happen? It's vibrational. Okay? Vermin are vibrationally lower than various species that we don't consider to be vermin. Flies and cockroaches, which we would consider obviously things that are not desirable in one's home. We have pest control to eliminate those types of problems, are disease carriers. And so, they I mean, look at what flies do. They lay their eggs in decaying
and filth.
Yeah. So they're dirty creatures. And so that actually vibrationally is much lower than, let's say, a domestic house cat, which has a much higher vibration, which is why we like them. It's not because they're cute and cuddly, It's because their vibration is much closer to us. Same with dogs, hedgehogs, even hamsters. Well, why do people like hamsters, but they don't like mice? Some people like mice, but,
Yeah, met a few. I've met some that like rats.
Yeah, same with rats. But overall, most people don't really have strong feelings about hamsters, but I've met a lot of people that have very strong feelings about mice and rats. Same thing with spiders. You got people that like spiders, people that really hate spiders. It's a vibrational thing, okay? And so, like, personally, I love snakes. I know a lot of people that are terrified of snakes, but I love snakes. I see a snake, I want to keep it. You're kind of neutral to snakes?
Yeah, I mean, I was the weird kid that would go up and pet them when we went on field trips and saw a snake. And of course, I was the only girl to want to do so, but I wouldn't want to have one. They're neat. I appreciate them.
I used to catch copperheads and garter snakes. The copperheads, when they were babies, they bite you, but they didn't have teeth sharp enough to actually give you a serious bite. But after when they got bigger, I kind of had to release them because then they became too dangerous to mess around with. But I've always liked snakes. But it's vibrational. Those are kind of more, like Joy says, neutral is a good word to put it, because they have a more of a vibration that kind of resonates between the two. But roaches, flies, things of that nature resonate extremely low, which is at the same or closer to the vibration of the demonic. So this is why you have even the very demon Beelzebub is Lord of the Flies.
In fact, that's what that sound is. When you say Beelzebub, it sounds like Beelzebub.
Yeah, I even have a hard time saying it.
It actually literally refers to the sound a fly makes when it's flying, that buzzing noise. That's what the name refers to.
Yeah. And so it goes back to vibrational resonance. Let's see. Julie asks, how did Christianity, or should I say Christians, become so afraid? It's nuts. I think it honestly comes from a lack of experience. And I have to I mean, I don't say this to be disparaging to other denominations, but it really is a byproduct of the Protestant Reformation. The Reformation brought, and fundamentalism in general, Christian fundamentalism in general, brought us to a very Bible-only, faith-only type of Christianity, which doesn't have much room for anything that falls outside of that paradigm. And evil is just not in the paradigm. And this is why you really, more often than not, we get so many Christians from other denominations coming to us for help because their own pastors don't know what to do. They really don't. And because of the way a lot of these Protestant denominations operate, there's no hierarchy of authority. So they can't really go to the bishop and say, okay, I've got a person in my parish that's having a problem. We need to connect them to somebody in the church that can help them with this. It's not even like that. A lot of them operate so independently that that building's it. And so if that pastor who runs that one little church doesn't know what to do, then that congregation goes without help. So then they start looking elsewhere.
One of the things that I have a problem with as well is if there's someone that's bad off enough that they have an attachment, a lot of times, the pastors will see, oh, well, you're a sinner and we don't need your kind here. Well, what are you there for? Who are you serving then?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, who are you serving? You're serving yourself, because I think a lot of these independent churches, and this is true in the Catholic sense as well as it is in the Protestant sense, because the independent sacramental movement is plagued with one-man churches who are really just basically looking to have title collectors. I used to be accused of being a title collector because I have so many. And they think, a lot of people would accuse me back in the day that you're just a one-man church collecting titles so that, people respect you. It's like, if that's what you think I'm doing, then you don't know me at all. Because I honestly, I am doing this so that I can develop a ministry that can actually function, because I feel Christianity is broken. I really do. We're at 33,000 plus denominations. Doesn't work. One Holy Spirit, folks. One Holy Spirit, 33,000 denominations. There's something grossly wrong with that. So it's time to get back to basics, but not to lose the essence of what the religion is. So, Catholicism, we can't avoid Catholicism just because, it's been overrun with politics. We just have to get rid of the politics, but not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's see. Sister Maximilian says that I have a soft spot for turtles. Yeah, if I see a turtle crossing the road, I will always stop the car and pick him up and move him along.
Aww.
I really do have a soft spot. I feel so bad for turtles, lugging that big shell around and getting run over by cars. And I try to save them.
I used to have a friend who was just crazy about turtles.
I don't know what it is about turtles. I like all reptiles, lizards, and when I lived in Florida, I was always collecting the anoles. They have brown anoles everywhere. Judith is asking about rats. Yeah, rats can be. Rats can be signs of the demonic, but like Leslie says, they're actually very clean animals. But some of them do carry diseases. They live in the sewers.
Yeah, if they're in the city, there's a good chance they might have something. But like the ones out in the field, they're no different from any other field creature.
Right. Typically very clean. Even pigs are very clean animals. They don't really. Yeah. The whole pig pen thing is a kind of.
And I remember watching. I don't remember which show it was. Andrew Zimmern has several. But he was out in the middle of, I think it was in Vietnam, and they got some rats from the field and ate those, and he said it was really good. It was better than you'd get in the city. I'm like, well, awesome. Okay.
Well, kind of an interesting experience there. Sister Mary Jones says she stopped her patrol car for a turtle. She got some funny looks. But the turtle gets the right of way. Yeah, always. I love turtles. They always get the right of way when I'm driving. Let's see. Kelly asks, or has more of a comment. She says she may sound silly, but she often prays St. Michael's prayer before she watches Ghost Adventures or any paranormal show. It's worth probably mentioning a little bit about that, because that is something that has come up a few times on Twitter, whether or not watching a show. Certainly around the time of the Demon House coming out, people were asking me if it was safe to watch. Honestly, I'm going to be completely honest. I have never seen an attachment occur over a movie. But I will say this. Fear can. Okay, so there's two exceptions to this rule. Typically, you're not going to run into any problems watching a paranormal show. Okay, if you watch an exorcism on television, you're going to be fine. You watch a show like Ghost Adventures, you're going to be fine. Even if they're communicating with something demonic, it's not going to come through your television and attack you. Okay, it doesn't have that kind of power. They are very finite creatures. They can't come through your TV screen any more than Zach can come through your TV screen and talk to you. Okay, that's not going to happen. You're not going to worry about Billy Tolly showing up in your living room after you're watching Ghost Adventures. Well, the same thing is true for any demons they interact with on the show. They're not going to show up in your living room either. But your fear can make you vulnerable to ones that you come into contact in your real life. And that's where the danger is. So that's number one. Don't fear these things. Don't give it any power. Okay, but it's not going to be the ones that it's not like you're going to get something conjured up. Ghost Adventures Live, I understand it's going to be a very dark episode. So, again, you're not going to have to worry about, no matter what goes on in that episode, you're not going to have to worry about anything happening to you at home, because it's not going to come through the TV. Now, the other exception, to that, so fear being number one. So if you watch a show with fear, then you probably shouldn't watch it, because the fear is what's making you vulnerable, but it's not the show. The second thing is, if a show works too closely with occult accuracy, that can pose certain problems, because then the imagery can act as a sigil if a sigil is used. I have seen this happen. Sister Maximilian and I have seen this happen with the movie Hereditary. Hereditary. I think that's the name. Was that the name? Hereditary?
I think it was. Yeah. I haven't seen it.
Oh my goodness. I would recommend, actually, you don't see that until you know that you're well beyond this thing that we're doing Sunday is well behind you. Okay. Now, the reason that is such a problematic movie is that they use the actual sigil from the old grimoires that is associated with the demon that the movie's about. And I can tell you, Sister Maximilian will tell you, the people in that audience were nuts. And I have never seen people behave like that. Now, was the movie the problem? No. The problem was the fact that the sigil appeared on screen and it acted as an invocation. So somebody in the audience was already charged with something demonic, and we know who it was the people that were sitting actually in front of us. And so the sigil activated through them. That's not going to obviously affect most of you, because hopefully you're not demonically charged in some way. But that can happen. And yet, Charmaine saw it. So did you have any weird experiences, Charmaine, in that when you went to see the episode? I mean, the movie? Because I'll tell you, I've never seen such weird audience members like that in my life. It was very bizarre. Let me know if you actually saw strange things during that movie. So yeah, that's one I would say stay away from. If you have anything demonic going on in your life, don't watch that one, because it could become activated through the sigil that appears on screen. And Sister
I know
Ray
when
Jones says sigils are dangerous, and she's absolutely
yes.
Sorry,
they
go
are.
ahead.
I know when I saw the sigil, because I think I think you posted it, but yeah. I saw it and I was like, the feeling I felt the most was I was curious. I wanted to know things. And it turns out that's an entity you go to when you want to know things, because it'll answer questions.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, so I see the sigil and obviously it's working, because I can sense what this demon is summoned for.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly right. Sister Maximilian in the chat room says several people got into a verbal confrontation over shoes. It was bizarre. I got a good look at one of their eyes. Definitely more going on in their life that was affected by the movie. Yeah, she would. It was so strange. I mean, we were at a very pivotal point in the movie that was really kind of almost a revelation point. And the people in front of us looked like two younger girls, maybe like 18, 19 at the most, might have even been younger. One of them on the right had her feet up on the seat in front of her, which is kind of a rude thing to do, but people do it. I see it all the time in movie theaters, but I've never seen people do it when somebody's sitting in the chair in front of them. And they were doing it while there were people in that chair. And she had been doing it the whole movie, and we were actually very far into the movie. I would say we were at least about an hour and 15 minutes, maybe more in. And her feet were still up on, and then suddenly the people that were in the chair that she was putting her feet up on turned around and in a very strange kind of weepy voice said, "Will you please put your feet down? They stink. Your feet stink. They stink." And she just kept going on and on and on in almost like a hysterical way. And it was almost humorous at first, but then the girl that was putting her feet up wouldn't put them down. And so she just kept yelling at her, telling her that her feet stunk for about like 10 minutes. And we were just like, will you just put your shoes down? We want to watch the movie. Shut up. And they eventually just got the two people that were saying that she stunk got up and walked out. And she just kept her feet up there the whole time. Didn't even flinch, didn't even move, didn't say a word to them. Acted like they weren't even there. It was very weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a movie. That would be one of the exceptions, if I would say. So look out for sigils. And like I said, they're only really dangerous in a film capacity if you're already demonically charged. So, the average person's still not going to be affected by it. But that is an example. Let's see. What else do we have? Yeah, it wasn't a full theater either. Any other questions that we have here? I'm just trying to look through the list since I don't really have you, Joy, to help me make sure that.
Yeah. I know. My computer's in the trunk.
Oh, it's fine. We're almost at the end of the show here. Julie says, even Catholics are afraid these days. She remembers having a conversation and learning that an exorcist was invited to a paranormal investigation show. He refused. I had a feeling that the exorcist would talk about ghost adventures, but I don't know. I honestly, we were even in the process. Some of you might even be aware that I operate two divisions. You all know about the Atlanta division of the Order of Exorcists, but way back when, we also established a New York division, and I was going to run it. I set it up. It actually had it's kind of a weird story, really, from what I understand. I don't really know what went on, but there used to be an active New York division, and then they just dropped off the face of the earth and never contacted us again, and we have no idea what happened. But New York is a pretty active location, probably because of the population size.
Oh, yeah.
So
I mean, it's a mega city.
It is. It really is. And the whole state's very populous, even when you're looking at other cities within the state of New York. So, we had a New York division set up, and the people that were going to help me run it up there were trying to recruit a priest who was actually Roman Catholic to work it. And he wanted nothing to do. It had nothing to do with the fact that we are an old Catholic order. Sometimes, Roman Catholics get all high and mighty with us because they see us as schismatic, and they treat us even worse than they would treat evangelicals that really hate them a whole lot more than we do, because we don't hate them at all. But it wasn't even that. It was that he didn't want anything to do with the devil. Didn't want to get involved with it. And I'm like, you're a Catholic priest, for God's sake. You don't want anything to do with the devil. Well, why'd you become a Catholic priest? Because let me tell you, the closer you get to God, the closer Satan gets to you. That's par for the course. And if you didn't learn that in seminary, then I really question your entire vocation. Honestly, I even got into a little bit of a rift with him. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know it wasn't too kind. I tend to be a little bit abrasive. Well, actually, I tend to be a lot abrasive.
A lot, yeah. A little bit.
Yeah. It's the work, You can, like I was telling, I was on the, Scary Radio last night with Detroit Unplugged, and, was talking about Sister Mary Joan, and and I said, I think sometimes he was talking about how badass Sister Mary Joan is, and we all know this, and it's sort of it messes with people's head because they're used to like Mother Angelica kind of nun, they're not used to Sister Mary Joan kind of nun, and we don't call her the warrior nun because it's funny. We call her the warrior nun because she is, and this is a warrior mission. This is not pastoral in a traditional sense. Yes, I do weddings, I hear confessions, I do baptisms of babies, just like every other Catholic priest does. But my primary work is not pastoral. My primary work is hunting things. And so, that's a different kind of person than, a pastor.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone loves Sister Mary Joan, and I honestly, how can you not? She's always there, and she gets the job done better than anybody than I can possibly imagine. So, so she's kind of a contrast, part nun, part Viking, I guess. I'm gonna rip your head off. Oh, my goodness. But guess what? It is the end of the show, everyone. I want to thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you, Joy, for, being co-host while you're driving through Atlanta traffic all the way up to, the Mission Church. This just, really, that's special in and of itself. So, okay, guys. So, Sunday afternoon at about 1 o'clock, watch my Twitter. We'll be going live stream, and we will live stream the entire event for you so that you can...
And if you're the...
Go ahead.
Go ahead. If you're the praying sort, please feel free to send as many prayers my way as you can possibly do.
Absolutely. We will also ask for them. Again, we'll ask you to pray with us during the stream, particularly when we get started on the object itself. Okay, so please pray. Yeah, absolutely. Pray with us. Pray with us now. Pray with us then. Always need prayers in this ministry more than anything. Remember, Jesus Christ is the exorcist. We are the mere facilitators. Good night, everyone, and God bless. I'll see you Sunday.